Hello and welcome to the IOSH Podcast. In this episode, new IOSH President Kelly Nicoll sits down with IOSH magazine editor Joanne Perry to discuss why her presidential year will be deeply influenced by her personal experiences, which have shaped her priorities for the IOSH profession.
Kelly, welcome to IOSH Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So this is a really great opportunity for members to get to know you a little bit better. So I thought we could start off by chatting a little bit about your background. And I know you've had a very diverse career so far. We're going to try and remember the different sectors you've been involved with. Hang on. Construction, facilities management, the NHS, events and broadcasting. Have I missed anything?
I'm currently in leisure and culture, which is a completely different area as well.
Did any one of those sectors particularly suit you or you felt at home there?
I really loved working for the NHS, but I think there's an awful lot of frustration about the lack of funding and the lack of ability to be able to kind of implement some of the really important changes that need to happen. I really felt at home in kind of events and sports officiating. I really loved how busy it was, how everything is, you can plan and prepare and train and practice things so much, but so many decisions are made in the moment. And I think that from a risk perception and a kind of actively managing risk was really, really interesting. And I really enjoyed that element of it.
So obviously the different sectors have their different challenges, which is a really, interesting part of an IOSH career where you can change sector and experience these different things and obviously learn more. And you've done so many different things and sports and events and so on. And tell me a little bit about construction.
I think construction is very similar. It's very male dominated. And I think we spend an awful lot of time trying to train, but again, it's a very similar sector to the kind of events and broadcasting in as much that an awful lot of those decisions need to be made in the moment. And I think, you obviously, within construction, you're doing an awful lot more of the really risky elements of, things like working at height, working in confined spaces, working with electricity. And I think one of the biggest conversations that continues to need to happen within construction has to be around mental health and in particular suicide. There's a campaign recently that came out called The Lost City, where they've worked out that the amount of men that they've lost to suicide within a certain time frame could have actually built London again, which was is a phenomenally difficult thing for us to get our heads around. And I think within that kind of health and safety element, that mental health element within construction becomes incredibly important.
Absolutely. That's a phenomenal statistic, but obviously even one life lost is too many.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think that's a really sad thing. One of the places I've worked, we created an incredibly positive workplace around mental health where we talked about our mental health like the weather, exactly like our mental health, physical health rather. We had hundreds of mental health first aiders, and even in that kind of culture, we lost a colleague and a friend to suicide, and that was exceptionally difficult because we were genuinely in a position where we thought we'd created this environment where people were comfortable with coming to ask for help and could see that actually we would drop everything in order to be able to help and support one of our friends and colleagues to be able to get out of that really dark space. And it just goes to show that, you can put everything in place. And if somebody is that voice in your head really convinces you that you either don't deserve it or nobody wants to help you, that actually you can't do what you really want to do, which is help people know that there's a bit of hope there. And, it's that old adage, isn't it? It's always darkest before the dawn. And without the dark, you can't see the stars. And very sadly, we lost somebody to suicide. And it's one of those things that, we had to reflect as a business and as a group of people. And we did an awful lot of kind of aftercare with the rest of the team. And I think that actually made them closer as well, which was really lovely.
I haven't been through that myself, so I'm not even going to pretend that I can imagine what that's like. But I can see, just talking about that, you were a little bit emotional because obviously it's such an intense experience that you went through. We, as the magazine, were actually talking about the development of a suicide prevention standard that the BSI is working on at the moment, and we're going to be covering that throughout 2025. We've just started now with a Jan-Feb issue, and we'll follow it all the way through to hopefully when it gets released as a standard.
I think it's so important. I think it's still one of those elements that unless you've sat in that space and you've felt and had those thoughts and felt that way, it's very, very difficult to have like full empathy for it. There's a reason why I have a semicolon tattoo on my wrist, which was part of the Semicolon Project, which was kind of around COVID, was that idea that actually as an author, as a writer, you can choose to use a full stop where you end the sentence, or you can choose to use a semicolon and continue. And I think it's a reminder to me and to anybody that I come across that you can always choose to continue your story. And I think it gives me a little bit of hope. And it was really lovely. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they also had a semicolon on their wrist, and we recognised it immediately, and we had that conversation, which was really, really lovely. Because I've definitely been there. During COVID, I really struggled. I'm an extrovert. I get my energy from being around other people. So being sat at my desk at home with nobody around was really, really hard. And I got a dog. I ended up getting a dog at the beginning of 2021 because I couldn't deal with being on my own for all of that time during the day and being in the same space all the time.
So just going, right to the heart of the wellbeing topic, that obviously is something that comes up a lot now in conversations, which is a good thing. It's something that's changed over time, that people now do speak about their mental health struggles. We see that with celebrities and so on. And obviously campaigners have been working on this too. So it is something that's out there. But one of your themes as president of IOSH is well-being of OSH professionals, which I think, in that broader conversation, perhaps the well-being of the OSH professionals maybe gets lost.
Yeah, I think so. We spend the vast majority of our time looking after other people, particularly as kind of mental health and well-being becomes part of our remit as well, as HR. And I've always found it a great honour for people to feel comfortable enough to come and be very, very vulnerable with me. And for me to hear people struggling, I find that a real privilege. And I think, but often the bit that's very much missing is that element of aftercare for the person that's hearing those things, and how do I shake that off? OSH professionals as well, we often deal with when things go wrong. So we deal with, the aftermath of really traumatic injuries, fatalities, and we pick the pieces up of other people when things have gone wrong and the worst happens. And I think if you're doing it properly, it hurts you as well, because we deeply care about the people that we work with. We don't want to see anybody get hurt. We want to see everybody go home at the end of every day. And I think sometimes we carry a little bit of that guilt, or we feel in some way responsible for the incident. And I think, we spend so much time looking after everybody else that we forget to look after ourselves an awful lot of the time. And that's why it's one of my themes. We look at mental health and well-being from how do we look after our employees, how do we look after our people, but oftentimes we're the ones that kind of get forgotten.
As IOSH president, what are you planning to do about this? And what can you do? Is it about getting the message out there? Is it implementing different kind of initiatives?
I think part of it is getting the message out there. I think one of the really exciting things with IOSH is we have great networks through our new communities, our branches and our groups. We have really great networks and safety nets and the ability to talk to other health and safety professionals. But I think sometimes we get very comfortable talking about the technical aspects of our roles, and I'm really struggling with this element, or can I get a noise risk assessment support and all of that. I think sometimes it's quite difficult for us to be able to walk the walk and go, I've had a really bad week. It's, I've had to deal with this incident, and actually I'm really struggling. I don't know what I missed. I don't know how this has happened, and I'm trying to run an investigation whilst also dealing with the emotional fallout of it as well. And I think the more we get comfortable with it within our own vulnerability, the easier it is for the people around us to do that as well. I'd love to be able to turn around and say, yes, we're going to implement this and this, but it's all very much kind of work in progress at the minute. I really want us to be able to be in a position where we have a very clear support system for our fellow health and safety professionals who are struggling, whether it be through the pressures of their work, through an incident, through that very acute kind of crisis management, or whether it's actually, I'm just really struggling. Health and safety can often be a really lonely career. A lot of people are solo consultants, or we're a health and safety team of one. And actually having that team and that support network around us becomes really, really important.
Really where IOSH and IOSH's Connections comes in, because if you're an IOSH professional working alone at an SME, then you can be part of this network and have that support when you need it.
Definitely. And, we've got a fantastic mentoring and reverse mentoring platform, and people build really close relationships with their mentors, and they often find that they've become friends for life, which is incredibly positive, and I really, really love that. But yeah, I think it's an element that we are very, very good at looking outward, and we don't necessarily look inward as a profession. And that's kind of why I wanted to change the conversation slightly and see how we do it for ourselves too.
So, we could talk about well-being for probably the next
hours.
3 hours, but obviously you do have some other themes as well, working at height being one of them. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that theme? We've
done an awful lot around kind of thought leadership and some of the kind of great soft skills that as health and safety professionals we need. Working at height, the HSE stats came out, at the end of 24, and they're still very much the same. You can predict that working at height will be the biggest killer. It will be agriculture, it will be construction, it will be it's the same industries and the same reasons why people aren't going home to their families. And I wanted to look at working at height because the worst incidents I've had to deal with in my career have all involved falls from height. One was a fatality, which was incredibly brutal and really, really hard. And one, there's been a number, but another one was a 6-foot fall when a ladder collapsed and this young man broke his back in 4 places and 6 months later walked back into work. And, but he still has issues. He still needs physio care and all of that kind of stuff. And I think this is the thing. It's one of those elements that if it goes wrong, it can be incredibly catastrophic. And it's not just the fatalities, it's those completely life-changing or life-limiting injuries that people have, and the ripple effect and the impact that has on friends and family is really, really difficult. So what I want to do is I want to look at working at height, kind of almost going back to basics. Let's look at the fundamental principles. Let's look at what the innovations are within the working at height field. And let's look at what we can do to stop exposing the people we work with to such a great risk. And it's not just here in the UK, it's across the world. And, and looking across other areas and other industries about what they're doing and whether we can bring some of those innovations here to the UK or we can share what we've got as well. It feels something that's really exciting. And I hope that we get to the point where actually we're nudging the dial and we're, I don't know whether it's maybe next year or in 5 years, we're starting to see those numbers reduce.
Hopefully. And obviously you're themes that you've just mentioned there linked together because, you're talking about the terrible trauma of when an accident or fatality happens, which, it must be absolutely horrendous. And then how do you look after those people who are affected by the incidents, including the IOSH professionals themselves? So there's quite a nice connection between the two of them. And I obviously hope that, the developments you're talking about and the improvements can happen. And it would be really great to get that that fatality rate down in the UK and elsewhere as well. No,
absolutely. I think we sometimes look at the stats, don't we? And we look at that number of, we bounce around kind of 148, 152, 143, etc. And I think sometimes having those numbers is really easy. I think what we forget sometimes is that every single one of those is an individual, is a family with a great big hole in it. And, it's very much that driver that IOSH has as a safe and healthy world of work for everyone, no matter where you are in the world. It's absolutely that thing that nobody should go to work and not come home. And I think that's, having been through that experience where somebody didn't come home, it became an absolute force for me. And I think that's probably the thing that's actually propelled me into this position as well.
One of your other themes is coaching. Is that also from personal experience? Have you had inspiring mentors?
I've had a whole heap of really inspiring mentors. I actually did a coaching for safety course and I really, really loved it. And it's reframing the way that we talk about safety. And I think we do an awful lot. We have lots of conversations around improving safety culture and creating areas where people are allowed to kind of figure it out. And those coaching skills it's different to mentoring. So mentoring is, here, let me share my experiences with you and hopefully you will learn something from them. Coaching is very much what do you think? And we can't be on everybody's shoulder all of the time, wherever they are working, going, what are you doing? Why are you doing it like that? Do it better, do it safer. And actually the coaching skills is around how we reframe those questions. So we do them in a way that people are feeling empowered and they're using their skills and their knowledge and the recognition of their own limitations to be able to manage risk in a much more kind of self-fulfilled way. Because for me, when you start using coaching questions and you start going, I'm going to hold the mirror up and I will help you, but you figure it out. It sinks in much better for some people, and you create cultures where people really are empowered and really feel comfortable to go, I know what I'm doing, or actually I don't know what I'm doing, but I know where I can go and get support or go and get help.
I like that idea of holding up a mirror because it's sort of an act of bravery, like to look at yourself and see what the limitations are that you just mentioned and, what can actually do about them. Because knowing where you're starting is how you grow, like to say, actually, maybe I'm not so good at this bit, or, I need to learn that better or do that better. That's how you get better at your job and improve in your life as well.
I use coaching skills with my friends and I'll ask them questions and they're like, don't you coach me?
You sound really fun at a party.
Yeah, I'm fun at a party most of the time. But it's that in order to become better versions of ourselves, whether that's at work or at home, I think we do need to be able to ask ourselves challenging questions and be able to have people around us that hold us accountable, because that's all we're all trying to do, isn't it? Just become the best version of ourselves that we possibly can. And I hope that having the conversations and the introduction around coaching skills will enable us to be able to do that.
With regard to coaching, what is meant by this phrase, coaching for safety?
I think it depends which books you read and who you go and talk to. I think coaching for safety can sometimes be seen as those kind of behavioural safety element of you going and having conversations with individuals or teams about the way that they're working. But actually for me, it starts with things like the risk assessment process. Like, I'm a health and safety professional and I don't do risk assessments. because the people that do the work should be doing the risk assessments. And that becomes really important, is getting them involved at that point, and recognising that as IOSH professionals, we aren't the experts in that role. The people doing that job are the experts, and our ability to be able to turn around and go, okay, you tell me, what are the biggest concerns that you have when you're doing this job? What things have we not thought about? What elements do you want to see better controlled? And having it as that kind of coaching session into the production of a risk assessment really allows a risk assessment to live and breathe off the page. People are bought into it. People know why we do that process, and they understand it an awful lot better. So, yeah, an awful lot of people think it's this behavioural safety thing where we go and do interventions and stuff like that. But actually, it's the whole thing. It's risk assessments. It's dynamically risk assessing. It's how we perceive risk. It's how we hold each other accountable. And I think the more we are comfortable having those conversations, and the more we're comfortable getting the people that are doing the work involved in that process, the better the culture becomes, because then you end up with teams who are like, we don't have the equipment for this. We don't have the right safety gear. We don't have what we would expect. So that becomes really interesting of, right, okay, so then how do you manage that? Do you stop, which you should, stop, reassess, figure it out, how do we do it safely? I've had instances before where I've had a phone call and they've gone, we've just walked off site. It's not safe. This has happened. Nobody's addressing this. So rather than asking for permission to leave, we're asking you, can you help us write an email to the client to say what we need in order to be able to come back and do our work? And the second that happened, I was like, yes, it's working. Because it's not for us as health and safety professionals to stand and hover or to kind of to mother everybody. It's absolutely for people to take that responsibility and embrace that responsibility and see that health and safety is absolutely an enabler for them to be able to do their jobs and get home at the end of every day.
It's empowering them.
Absolutely. And that's what we need. That's what we want, isn't it? We want all of our people to be able to be empowered to say, well, hang on a minute. Or actually be able to turn around and say, you're not doing that right. Where's your PPE? Where's this? Where's that? And be able to hold each other to account as well. Because, yeah, if you're the only one in an SME, you cannot be everywhere all at the same time. I'm good, but I haven't worked out how to clone myself just yet.
Thanks for listening. Tune in again soon for more conversations on all things health and safety.